You asked me, Lieutenant, you're gonna get it. You want to prove your manhood, but it's a little late in the day, and there aren't many choices left as to how to do it.
You're a lousy soldier, Coserano, and that goes for the rest of these poor, sad, sensitive, sick boys you want me to bottle feed. Did somebody forget to tell you when you fight a war, you fight a war?
You're traveling to another dimension. Your next stop, the Twilight Zone.
In Nicholas Parisi's biography of Rod Serling, it was noted that the most therapeutic way for Rod to manage his wartime trauma was through his writing. As Serling himself put it, writing was a way for him to get it out of his gut. In addition to being the mastermind of the Twilight Zone, Serling was also a decorated veteran who served in combat during World War II. It's well known the horrors of war remained with him, so it's no wonder we'd see the theme of war in so many episodes of the series. In fact, most of the war episodes were written by Serling himself, including the entry we'll be discussing today, A Quality of Mercy. Although the story originated from a concept by Sam Rolfe, the co-creator of Have Gun Will Travel and The Man from U.N.C.L.E., the script was completed by Rod Serling after Rolfe was unable to follow through. And as we'll see, Serling definitely left his mark. A Quality of Mercy is episode 15 from season 3, and it was directed by Buzz Kulik. As always, spoilers are ahead.
It's August 1945. The last grimy pages of a dirty, torn book of war. The place is the Philippine Islands. The men are what's left of a platoon of American infantry, whose dulled and tired eyes, set deep in dulled and tired faces, can now look toward a miracle. That moment when the nightmare appears to be coming to an end. But they've got one more battle to fight, and in a moment we'll observe that battle. August 1945, Philippine Islands. But in reality, it's high noon in the Twilight Zone.
A Quality of Mercy has a compelling backdrop. It takes place at the tail end of World War II. We're presented with a date, August 6th, 1945. An important date not just for the purposes of this tale, but also for its historic context. We'll come back to that shortly. Interestingly, we don't meet our lead up front. Instead, we're introduced to the supporting cast, a group of battered American infantrymen overlooking a cave that's full of wounded Japanese soldiers. At this point in time, the plan is straightforward.
They're gonna fire for effect until late this afternoon, and if they can't smoke them out, maybe we'll bypass them.
Well, that's what I like to hear.
For fellow Star Trek fans, the standout here is Leonard Nimoy. Here he plays Hanson, the radio operator. Although this is only a small role, it's still great to see Nimoy pre-Star Trek.
They say that's the limit.
But the character who takes the spotlight in these early moments is Sergeant Coserano, as played by Albert Salmi. We'd see Salmi in 2 other Twilight Zones, Execution, and one of the more unique Season 4 episodes, Of Late I Think of Cliffordville. Coserano's time in the trenches may have left him worse for wear, but he still has the backs of his fellow soldiers, and he has a solid perspective on this situation.
I've got no big yen to run into anything anymore, not at this stage of the game.
The Japanese soldiers holed up in the cave who refuse to surrender are an issue, but even that would seem to be under control. That is, until Lieutenant Cattell, as played by Dean Stockwell, arrives on the scene.
Which one of you is Sergeant Coserano?
Cattell is young, clean-cut, and obviously inexperienced. From the onset, we see Cattell is overly anxious to make a name for himself.
I think we'll have to move up and then go right in there and wipe them out. What about it, Sergeant?
This dynamic of the bloodthirsty young commander versus these war-weary soldiers is excellent. A hothead like Cattell is the last thing these guys need.
That's a filthy piece, soldier.
Sergeant Coserano stresses that they could easily bypass these Japanese soldiers without it changing the outcome of the war. But that doesn't fly with Cattell. The main reason he's here is to get his hands dirty.
How many men have to die before you're satisfied?
Offhand, I'd say all of them. No matter who they are or where they are, if they're the enemy, they get it. First day of the war or last day of the war, they get it.
Dean Stockwell does very well here. He's unlikable as hell, but that's the point. We've all known people like this, who storm onto the scene and don't care who they have to roll over to achieve their goals. But this is war. This is life and death. So a guy like this, in a position of power, who's short-tempered, bigoted, and out for blood is all the more dangerous.
You got a big yen to do some killing? Okay. We'll do some killing for you. But don't ask us to stand up and cheer.
Despite the protests, Lieutenant Cattell is dead set on attacking the cave. And with that, our Twilight Zone twist comes into play. Cattell drops his binoculars and suddenly finds himself surrounded by Japanese soldiers.
You dropped your glasses, sir.
And in an even bigger shock, he too has somehow become a Japanese soldier. He then panics and flees. But gunfire from Americans forces Cattell back to the Japanese camp. Now, before we continue our discussion of this strange turn of events, let's take a quick look back at the work of our lead, Dean Stockwell.
It's kind of late at night for you to be out. Where are you going?
To join the Navy.
Oh, well, you know what?
Stockwell's career actually began as a child actor. By 6 years old, he already had his first major film role in Anchors Aweigh, alongside Gene Kelly and Frank Sinatra. His career would go on to span 7 decades. He appeared in countless films many of us are likely familiar with, and of course there was his role in Married to the Mob, for which he was nominated for an Academy Award. Originally, he was set to appear in an earlier Twilight Zone episode that also dealt with the war, The Purple Testament, but in that case, he was forced to drop out due to scheduling conflicts. As for Stockwell's portrayal as a Japanese soldier, who we'll come to know as Lieutenant Yomori, well, this is a very dated aspect of the episode.
Those are Americans in the cave?
Yes, sir.
The race swap may be an issue for some, which is understandable, but within the context of the show, there's no malice intended. Cattell's transformation into a Japanese soldier is basically a means for his flawed character to see things from the other side. On a related note, I'm most familiar with Dean Stockwell from the classic TV series Quantum Leap. In that show, he played the memorable role of Al, a holographic guide for Dr. Sam Beckett, as played by Scott Bakula, who would leap through time and temporarily take the place of different people throughout history. But in the series, whenever Sam made his leaps, it was handled by simply showing him swapping clothes. We'd typically catch a glimpse of whoever he changed into in a reflection. So maybe something along those lines would have worked here as well.
Where are we? I ask you a question.
Getting back to the episode at hand, there's no ambiguity. Cattell is flat out told that he is Lieutenant Yomori, and that it's actually May 4th, 1942.
No. No. What happened to me?
So we get some time travel here as well, which I'm always glad to see in the Twilight Zone. Now, for all intents and purposes, the entire situation from earlier is repeated.
You said they were wounded in there.
When they ran inside, they were carrying each other. I don't think there are more than 20 or 30 men inside.
In this alternate scenario, the Japanese are preparing to advance on a cave which is filled with wounded Americans. This role reversal hammers home one of the ideas the episode is exploring. If you allow yourself to imagine walking in another man's shoes, then maybe you can change your view. More to the point, Cattell does seem to learn the value of mercy.
They are wounded in there, sir. Perhaps what? Perhaps we can let them surrender.
Another highlight of this episode is Yomori's commanding officer, Captain Nakagawa, as portrayed very well by character actor Hatsuo Jerry Fujikawa. This guy is the embodiment of pro-war. He's the Japanese equivalent of Cattell as he was initially depicted.
How many must die before he's satisfied?
Offhand, Lieutenant Yomori, I would say all of them. I don't care where they are or who they are. If they are the enemy, they are to be destroyed.
Eventually, Lieutenant Cattell drops his binoculars once more and finds himself back in 1945 with his own American troops.
Something happened. Something...
Lieutenant Cattell. Orders, Lieutenant. They want us off the hill.
Now, it's already been made clear that Cattell has thankfully had a change of heart, which is great, but what comes next is something I found a bit odd.
The Air Force dropped a bomb in Japan this morning. A big one.
The company receives word that the Americans have dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. With the news that the bomb has dropped, the historic date we were presented with up front comes into play. Now, there's no need to attack the Japanese soldiers in the cave. In truth, I would have preferred to see Cattell have more agency in these final moments. But we at least get to see that the attack on the cave being called off is a relief for the once hot-headed lieutenant. With that, we get some closure, but more importantly, there's a glimmer of hope.
The quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It blesseth him that gives and him that takes. Shakespeare, The Merchant of Venice. But applicable to any moment in time, to any group of soldiery, to any nation on the face of the earth, or, as in this case, to the Twilight Zone.
Of all the Twilight Zone episodes that covered the topic of war, A Quality of Mercy may not have been my favorite, but I'd still say it's a solid entry overall. The wartime setting was handled very well. There's a grim atmosphere throughout, so it felt genuine. The setup is top-notch. We have a ticking clock element in place, which amplifies an already tense situation. But what really keeps the momentum going is the conflict between the lieutenant and the soldiers.
If I tell you to stand up on your feet, you'll stand up. If I tell you to head toward that cave, with weapons port and bayonets fixed, that's exactly what you're going to be doing.
There are strong performances all around, but it would have been interesting to have seen some more from the other soldiers. And it would have been great to have had more Leonard Nimoy in the mix.
Logical decision, logically arrived at.
But the real highlight of this internal conflict is easily Causarano and Cattell butting heads.
Miserable fat being, there's always someone like you that sneaks in before they close the door to grind an axe before he gives that final order.
These two guys have completely opposing viewpoints, and when they clash, we as viewers get to consider both perspectives. I find it interesting that Rod Serling tackled this heavy subject matter during this time. Keep in mind, back in the 1960s, World War II wasn't exactly a distant memory. But here we have a story that touches on mercy and compassion for your enemy. It's a powerful message that aligns perfectly with Rod Serling's anti-war beliefs and his exploration of the complexities of the human condition.
I will have no more compunction about making them a head shorter than I would stepping on that anthill.
But they are men.
A Quality of Mercy also parallels Serling's personal experiences in the military. The backdrop of the Philippine Islands, for instance, holds particular significance. Rod Serling served in that region as part of an assault and demolitions team, which was nicknamed the Death Squad because it suffered such high casualties. In Unlocking the Door to a Television Classic, Martin Grams Jr. notes that while serving overseas, Rod Serling's father passed away. When he requested an emergency leave to return home, he was refused. Graham suggests that perhaps the episode might reflect Serling's bitterness toward the military, who prioritized the death of the enemy over moral compassion. I could see this as a possibility. As I mentioned up front, writing was a way for Rod Serling to get it out of his gut. And what better way to convey his sentiments than through the Twilight Zone, which in this case targeted a volatile lieutenant with a chip on his shoulder and served up a lesson about the value of mercy. I do recommend giving this episode a watch. It is one that has some very dated aspects, so it may not be for everyone. I'd rate A Quality of Mercy 3 out of 5 broken binoculars. Okay, that's it for me. If you've seen this one and have your own thoughts on it, feel free to drop a comment below. And don't forget, if you enjoyed this, hit like, hit sub, and I'll do my part to continue exploring the fifth dimension. Until next time, stay safe, be well, later.